Well, hello there. Today we are going to talk about developments in South and Southeast Asia. So, same time period where we looked at Dar al-Islam, same time period where we looked at China, but now we're moving it to talk about India, the surrounding countries, and Southeast Asia, modern-day Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, some other ones. Can you read me? What are the objectives here? They're pretty broad. Explain how the various belief systems and practices of South and Southeast Asia affected society over time. Okay, what they're talking about there is clearly going to be Buddhism, Hinduism, and then especially in northern India, Islam. Explain how and why various states of South and Southeast Asia developed and maintained power over time. Again, very broad, similar to some of the things we saw in the objectives with Dar al-Islam. So let's look at a map. Look at this map here from Freemanpedia, and it really lets you see all the different big kingdoms and empires in South and Southeast Asia. He's color-coded this. You can find it on his website, or you can pause it here to look at the different ones here. But if you notice, you're looking at this here, and it's pretty obvious that every single one of these groups is going to be involved in what economic thing. I'll give you a second. I'm assuming that this is like a kid's TV show, and you yelled it out at the screen, and you yelled out trade. And that's right, there is trade. Let me get my laser pointer here, friends. There's the Silk Road. Hello, Silk Road. Cool. And there are the sea lanes, all of the Indian Ocean trade routes here. You'll notice that there are also a lot of what are called choke points. There are straits here, bays where people can go to, and kingdoms will frequently appear along these different straits, what I'll call straits of trade. Why are they so important? Well, if you're going to get from present-day India into China, guess what? You're going to have to probably go through here. And so we're going to see historically at the Strait of Malacca, there are going to be a lot of different people trying to control this area, from native Southeast Asians to the Dutch. And just a little reminder, we have already learned a little bit about South Asia because we learned about the Delhi Sultanate. And since we learned about the Islamic world and how it relates to present-day India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and all that, we've talked about this a little bit, and you've read about the Delhi Sultanate, especially in your AMSCO book. Okay. So let's start with South Asia, because with South Asia, we can talk about the belief systems that are native to here. We've already talked about Buddhism, so I'm going to focus on Hinduism today. South Asia basically means India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, also probably Nepal, maybe Afghanistan. It does get complicated when I look at what the geography that AP gives us is. You see here where Afghanistan which is next to Pakistan, is part of Central Asia, but it's also part of South Asia, and so it gets a little odd there. And then is Nepal East Asia or South Asia? Well, it's its own thing because it's on the mountains, but it's super culture related to India, but it's also different. So again, it's not the best regional term we have. Reminder, there's a crash course on Buddhism and Ashoka, but it talks heavily about the caste system and Hinduism, which is what I want you to pay attention to. And another reminder, ABC Clio has a thing on Hinduism that Mr. White and I have put together, so you can read and learn more about it there, and you need to do that. It's also on my website, and you can also look at the PowerPoint and click the link for this video. All right, so ABC Clio has a couple opening paragraphs about Hinduism that I think are a great way to understand it. That Hinduism, if you haven't studied it, really isn't what you think it is. Hinduism is not a unified, coherent religion, but rather a collection of many related religious beliefs and practices that are accepted within the framework of Hindu society. Having evolved for more than 3,000 years, Hinduism embraces a complex system of rituals, cults, institutions, practices, and doctrines. A Hindu may be a monotheist, polytheist, or atheist. Hindus may attend temple, follow strict standards of conduct, or practice religious rituals, but none are requirements. Hinduism's wide religious umbrella includes everything from animal worship to mysticism to profound theological doctrines. There is no single scripture as in Christianity's Bible, but rather thousands of collections of writings and teachings. Although most Hindus believe in gods, there is no single explanation for who or what the gods are. In fact, there are believed to be more than 1 million gods in Hinduism. Hindu is a catch-all term that includes most of the thousands of different religious groups that have evolved in India since 1500 BCE. So this is an umbrella term. There are these commonalities, though, and we can call these people Hindus, but it's much more of when outsiders like first Persians and then other Westerners came, trying to get a catch-all to explain all these different subsets and belief systems. And there are commonalities, so let's look at them. Okay, so like I said, you really need to read more about Hinduism in ABC Clio and your Strayer text and your AMSCO text. Tons of resources out there. Very complicated. You're not going to get the full information about it, even in my class, and certainly not in this PowerPoint, but there are some texts associated with it. There are many. The original texts were the Vedas, which even predate Hinduism, the Upanishads, the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita. There are tons of other texts. Like I said, it's polytheistic, as I call it. Some people say, look, there's millions of gods. This is polytheism, especially when you compare it to a religion that enters India a little bit later, which is anyone? Yes, Islam. That's right. Good job, you in the back. Islam is so fiercely and strictly monotheistic that seeing all these different deities and avatars of the larger deities, like, this is a polytheistic religion. But then some people say, look, everything is just a manifestation of this ultimate reality and this force known as Brahman. And so really, if everything's an expression of the same force, then that's like it's just one god. Or is it even a god? And so you could call it atheistic, you could call it monotheistic, you could call it polytheistic. Certainly in a Western lens, looking at this as somebody who grew up in a Western society, I was always taught that it was polytheistic, but it's whatever, Just know that the debate rages on within Hindu communities, so it's not even straightforward. I'm going to put up some of these terms here, and I'm just going to talk about them freely. They're not really in any order. I probably should have made them in a better order, but here I am not doing that. Anyway, there is an absolute reality in Hinduism, and this is called the Brahman. And even what Brahman is up to debate amongst different Hindus. Some thinking it as this like ultimate deity in which everything is divided up against. Some thinking that it is the reality of the world we see, while what we see is an illusion, and this is the ultimate true reality. Okay, cool. But you should essentially think of it as the ultimate reality. It is, everything, and little pieces of break-offs of Brahman, if you will, represent people's individual souls, or Atman. Let me get my laser pointer here. Atman. These are the individual souls, and Atman, they go through the cycle of rebirth called samsara, and that's the Western word reincarnation, being born over and over and over again. And if you're playing the samsara game correctly here, you are going to be born a higher and higher caste. So it's important to point out that Hinduism reinforces the caste system. That's very important. And how do you get born into a higher caste? Well, that comes to the concepts of karma and dharma. We've talked a little bit about what karma isn't in class, right? You cut someone off in traffic and then later your car gets keyed. No, that's not the Hindu or Buddhist concept of karma. That's vandalism, okay? That's something called instant karma. That's a thing that comes about like in the 60s, and this idea of taking this Eastern quote-unquote thought and bringing it into the mainstream and all that stuff. That's not what we're dealing with here. Karma here is basically it's a reflection of your dharma. So your dharma is your duty in life, your role in life, what you're supposed to do. And if you fulfill your duty correctly, you're a warrior. You, as the Crash Course talks about it, you're a warrior, and you spend your life as a warrior, fulfilling your duty, doing what you're supposed to do in life. That's how you would get your positive karma, so to speak. You would then advance up in the caste system to a higher caste until finally you would be released from the cycle of rebirth. You'd be released from samsara, and that's called moksha. Moksha is the release from the cycle of death and rebirth, being one with the Brahman again, and it is similar, though different, to the Buddhist concept of nirvana. Okay, nirvana is enlightenment. You get released from the cycle of death and rebirth, unless you're a bodhisattva. But anyway, so Hinduism has similar concepts. Of course, Hinduism has similar concepts because Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. Okay, moving on. So let's look at the caste system here. You can sketch this if you want to, but it is the most rigid social structure. There is virtually no social mobility, and you have these 4 castes, which are called Varna. And it's more complicated than that because within each Varna, you have these subgroups that are basically jobs or occupations, and they're called Jati. And the Jati make up the Varna. Now, over time, some Jati might become more important than another Jati, but one Varna won't become more important than another Varna. Anyway, I talked about this earlier. The idea with moksha being released here is that you'll eventually keep being reborn higher and higher on the caste system until you're here, fulfilling your dharma and your duty, and then, boom, you're not born again. There's also a whole caste that's not even part of the caste system, known as the untouchables. And this has been historically a really persecuted class in South Asia. And we'll see a lot of Buddhist converts and then a lot of Muslim converts. They would come from lower caste Hindus who are disillusioned about like their treatment and all that kind of stuff. This caste system is completely reinforced by Hinduism and reincarnation. And it's a very good glue to keep Indian society together. There's different answers for how to run a society. Confucianism has this very like top-down, centralized approach. The father to the son as the emperor is to his subjects. This whole familial relationship building, it keeps China really cohesive and centralized. The caste system does that as well, but it keeps them very decentralized. Everybody knows their place, and society really polices where everyone should be. Shame and ostracism are used if you violate the caste system. That's not going to say that plenty of people won't violate the caste system throughout history. Of course they will, because people aren't monoliths. But in any event, there's not really a lot of centralized power in India throughout history. There will be different empires and states that come and go. But for much of India's history, it's very regional and very decentralized. But it's still held together and very stable through the caste system. Because at the strictest form, the caste system will be, well, for lack of a better word, strict. It'll be, let's say that you have a specific job as a commoner, you're a Shudra, and you build a specific thing. Let's say, you make bricks, all right? Whatever, you make tile, okay? Just making this up as we go. So you're a brick maker, a stonemason, if you will, and you will only be allowed to live in areas with people who are also of that same job. If you have a daughter, she will marry someone who has that same job, whose parents had the same job. Your son will have that same job. Your wife's father had that job, so on and so forth, or that jati, and so it gets really strict. Today, the caste system is outlawed in India, though it is certainly still there, especially in more rural areas. Like most societies in more urban areas, they tend to be more cosmopolitan, a lot of different belief systems, different ethnicities living together, religious beliefs, etc., just like in everywhere else in the world. But the caste system is still very much there, even though it's not supposed to be. All right, let's talk about some beliefs and practices. Now, this is for South and Southeast Asia. I want to talk about the Bhakti movement and Sufism and some other stuff like that. So let's go. So first, there's something in Hinduism called the Bhakti movement. And the Bhakti movement, it emerges in southern India, and it's all about a personal devotion to God with one supreme deity, usually Vishnu or Shiva. It will appeal to low caste and to women because it's not really reinforcing the caste system here. It's non-discriminatory. It's open-minded. They use local languages. And if you're seeing some commonalities here about like this personal devotional relationship to God, where it's more about you kind of having this connection to God, you might say, hey, that sounds really familiar to something we just studied. And you're right, because this was definitely influenced by Sufism. Those of you who have studied European history, also the idea of using local languages and having a personal devotion to God, that's also very similar to what will happen in the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And that's, these are 3 different religions: Sufism with Islam, Bhakti with Hinduism, and Protestantism with Christianity. But you see these commonalities. And anytime you see these commonalities in history, pay attention to that, because College Board loves to just, make you compare them. So we talked about Sufism before, but AMSCO does readings on it in this time, so I'll talk about it here. So Sufism, it's the mystical branch of Islam. It spreads Islam through missionary activity. I talked about the two M's for spreading Islam. This would be the three M. The first one was military conquest, right? We see with the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid, there's military conquest and a lot of people convert after being conquered. But then the second M is merchants, right? Spreading into West Africa, spreading into Southeast Asia. Merchants are the ones who really spread Islam. And then missionaries. Now, Islam doesn't have the same missionary zeal, I would say, that Christianity and Buddhism do, where you have monasteries and people really trying to spread the faith in like kind of a top-down approach where you have this centralized authority and then they go out and sponsor monasteries and mission groups and all this stuff. But there are missionaries in Islam, and that's Sufis. Now, they represent a small minority of most Muslims, so it's not an overall, missionary ideas aren't an overall like big concept in Islam as they are in Christianity and in Buddhism. Anyway, they emphasize a personal devotion to God, like Bhakti, like Protestantism, like Lutheranism, and that kind of stuff. And there's also the use of meditation, chanting, dancing, praying. Also, Sufis might be the reason we have coffee. So thanks. Thanks, Sufism. And then we've talked about this a little bit before, but Buddhist monasticism. This is the earliest form of monasticism we see. If you don't know what monasticism means, don't worry about it. I'll tell you. It's when you have these buildings, these monasteries, and you have men working as monks and women working as nuns. You're like, monks and nuns like in Christianity? Yes. Christianity also has monasticism, though Buddhism is an earlier religion than Christianity, so they did it first. These will help spread Buddhism. We'll see it especially along the Silk Road, but also into Southeast Asia as well. They provide social programs. They deal with things with education, orphanages, providing food to the hungry, hospice care to the dying. And so we have these, coming out of South and Southeast Asia, we have these three different beliefs and practices: Buddhist monasticism, the Bhakti movement, and Sufism. Be able to write about them, be able to compare them, realize they're three different religions, but in many ways they will also maybe fulfill a similar purpose. So that's important. Finally, South Asian kingdoms. I just want you to look at it here on the map. You have Vijayanagara, the Rajput kingdoms here, and the Sinhala dynasties, which will essentially just become Sri Lanka. In Southeast Asia, you have the Srivijaya Empire, sometimes called Srivijawa. And it's down here in the purple, by the way. Khmer, Majapahit, and the Sukhothai, what will basically become Thailand. Okay, and here we have them divided by religion. Here are the Hindu states. Here are the Buddhist states. That's pretty much it. Live the dream. Okay.